Right. Good morning, colleagues. The 9,382nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of peace and security of Ukraine. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Romania, Turkey and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. 3 member states also expressed interest in participating in today's meeting, namely Estonia, the Netherlands and Poland. They will submit their statements for publication in letters addressed to the President of the Security Council, which we will circulate. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary-General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Mr. Martin Griffiths, Under Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and, as requested by the Russian Federation, Mr. Mikhail Khazin, an independent macroeconomist. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite His Excellency Mr. Olof Skog, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Madam President. On Monday, when speaking to this Council, I reiterated the Secretary-General's deep regret over the decision by the Russian Federation to terminate its participation in the Black Sea Initiative, including the withdrawal of Russian security guarantees for navigation in the northwestern part of the Black Sea. As a result, food prices are rising around the globe, adding to existing agricultural, energy, and financial crises that are already severely impacting the world's most vulnerable people. We have now witnessed a further blow to global food security as Russia, for the 4th consecutive day, struck Ukraine's Black Sea ports in Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Mykolaiv with missiles and drones, destroying critical port infrastructure, facilities, and grain supplies. These attacks have also resulted in civilian casualties. Yesterday in Odessa, 1 person was reportedly killed and at least 8 others were injured. In Mykolaiv, Russia's attack reportedly killed 2, while 19 more were injured. We strongly condemn these attacks and urge Russia to stop them immediately. As the Secretary-General stated yesterday, the bombardment of the Black Sea ports in Ukraine contradicts Russia's commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding with the United Nations, which states that, and I quote, "The Russian Federation will facilitate the unimpeded export of food, sunflower oil, and fertilizers from Ukrainian-controlled Black Sea ports," end quote. The new wave of attacks on Ukrainian ports risks having far-reaching impacts on global food security, in particular in developing countries. Furthermore, as we have repeatedly stated, attacks against civilian infrastructure may constitute a violation of international humanitarian law. Madam President, threats regarding potential targeting of civilian vessels navigating in the Black Sea waters are unacceptable. We are also concerned about the reports of sea mines laid in the Black Sea, endangering civilian navigation. We strongly urge restraint from any further rhetoric or action that could deteriorate the already dangerous situation. Any risk of conflict spillover as a result of a military incident in the Black Sea, whether intentional or by accident, must be avoided at all costs, as this could result in potentially catastrophic consequences to us all. Madam President, attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are not a new trend in this conflict, but rather its tragic pattern. The World Health Organization has documented damage to over 1,000 healthcare facilities, resulting in 101 deaths and 139 injuries. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, UNESCO has verified damage to 270 cultural sites, including 116 religious sites, 27 museums, 95 buildings of historical significance, 19 monuments, 12 libraries, and 1 archive. Moreover, 3,467 educational institutions have also suffered from bombing and shelling, with 335 of them destroyed. According to UNESCO, 12 journalists and media workers have been killed since the start of the war. Also, children in Ukraine continue to be disproportionately affected by the appalling high level of grave violations in this conflict. Children are being killed and maimed by explosive weapons with wide area impact in populated areas. Millions of Ukrainians, including nearly 2/3 of Ukrainian children, have been forced to leave their homes. For those who remain, the damage and destruction of critical infrastructure continues to cause hardships as access to basic services are disrupted. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam on 6 June and the subsequent flooding have far-reaching long-term environmental and humanitarian consequences. According to Ukraine's Agriculture Ministry, almost 600,000 hectares of farmland no longer have access to irrigation water following the dam destruction. This compounds the existing challenges that Ukrainian farmers face, in addition to mines and unexploded ordnance. The flooding also worsened the already volatile situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Experts of the International Atomic Energy Agency continue to closely monitor the availability of cooling water for the plant. Ensuring its safety and security remains of utmost importance, not just to Ukraine, but to the broader region. Madam President, landmines will continue to pose dangers to civilians for years to come, as almost 1/3 of the country is reportedly contaminated with unexploded ordnance, landmines, and cluster munitions. We are working with the government of Ukraine and other partners to tackle this threat of unexploded ordnance. So far, our mine action efforts have reached almost 3.5 million people. But these figures are not the whole story. The war has impacts that are harder to measure. A generation of Ukrainian children has been traumatized, and the impacts of the war on the mental health of children and adults will be long-lasting. Madam President, when I briefed the Council on Ukraine earlier this week, I did not foresee that I would be returning to this chamber again today. The events of the past week about the latest developments in the Russian Federation's senseless war against its neighbor, a war with consequences that can be felt around the world. Russia's termination of its participation in the Black Sea Initiative, coupled with its bombardment of crucial ports, will further compound this crisis. The Secretary General has been clear. We will not stop our efforts to facilitate the unimpeded access to global markets for food and fertilizers from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation. In closing, Madam President, let me stress that the only way to halt the catastrophe unfolding in Ukraine is to forge an end to the war based on international law, principles enshrined in the Charter, and in line with General Assembly resolutions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Carlo for her briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Martin Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As we have discussed in this chamber before and on many occasions, the war in Ukraine has had a significant impact on the world, as Rosemary has just been outlining, far beyond the country's borders. A world already reeling from an accumulation of shocks, of which we are all well aware. The scale of global humanitarian needs under these circumstances is vastly outpacing the resources we have available. Just as a reminder, in my function as an emergency relief coordinator, I'm responsible for the relationship and the representation of the humanitarian community to the 362 million people now in 69 countries who need humanitarian aid, a number that has never been reached anywhere near before. And an unprecedented $55 billion is required to meet the priorities within their needs. Many humanitarian plans, as we have discussed, including this week, remain severely underfunded. So for millions of people around the world already, the margins are fine and their capacity to withstand further shocks is limited. Thus, Madam President, almost exactly a year ago to the day, we celebrated the signing of the Black Sea Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding on Russian food and fertilizer exports. These agreements were a decisive international response to spiraling food prices that were undermining food security around the world. Their signing also represented something more. It was a demonstration that we could achieve together, with goodwill and good faith, innovative, daring solutions that put humanity above politics, even in the most extreme of circumstances, and in this case, an agreement between those two warring parties. And in the space of 12 months of that day in Istanbul, the Black Sea Initiative has enabled the safe export of close to 33 million metric tons from Ukrainian Black Sea ports to 45 countries, aboard more than 1,000 outbound vessels. I think that's an achievement which, even on that day in Istanbul, we could not have imagined. And it has been so because of the cooperation between the signatories to that agreement, to that historic agreement in war. It's allowed the World Food Programme to transport more than 725,000 metric tons of wheat in support of food assistance operations in Afghanistan, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen, the countries now impacted by recent decisions. And as the Secretary-General highlighted earlier this week, the Memorandum of Understanding has also delivered concrete results over the past year, supporting increased volumes of Russian agricultural products to reach global markets. And together, the Istanbul agreements for the 22nd of July contributed to sustained and essential reductions in global food prices, which by last month, before this, were more than 23% below the record highs reached in March of last year. And therefore, of course, Madam President, Monday's confirmation that the Russian Federation was withdrawing from the Black Sea Initiative was immensely disappointing to all of us, and all of us way beyond this chamber. And the developments in the 4 days since, as Rosemary has said, have been alarming. Russian strikes against port facilities, also referred to by Rosemary, in Odessa and other Ukrainian ports, are reported to have injured civilians, damaged infrastructure essential to the export of food, and which were, before Monday, protected installations in those ports because they were aligned to the export of food and relevant products. Ukrainian farmers, as we can imagine, look on at this nightly assault with great anxiety as they harvest now the crops nurtured in the shadow of war and protected and with a future because of the Black Sea Initiative, in spite of risks from landmines, Rosemary has spoken to that, unexploded ordnance, the damage to the dam and the flooding that was consequent upon it, damage to storage facilities, as in this week, and infrastructure, food that they are now harvesting that may no longer be able to reach the global markets that so desperately need them. Global grain prices, as I think we all know, have spiked this week, threatening to undo the hard-won progress achieved over the past year, and this potentially threatens hunger and worse for millions of people. Wheat and corn futures, and I'm quoting from the World Food Programme, have risen by almost 9% and 8% respectively on Wednesday. Wednesday saw the largest single-day increase in wheat prices since the full-scale invasion commenced. And this is not surprising. This was predicted, and it happened. Much of the world relies on the affordability of these staples, which is under threat yet again. Higher prices, of course, will be most acutely felt by families in developing countries already at risk, who tend to spend a much higher share of their household income on food, and we have discussed that in the context of many places of humanitarian need. Escalatory rhetoric also threatens to further undermine the safe transportation of food through the Black Sea more broadly. And with no access to ports or world markets, farmers may have no choice but to stop farming. In addition to the global effects, this would have an immediate impact on domestic food prices and on the economic stability of Ukraine. This, in turn, would affect food security inside Ukraine and in the region. So the humanitarian catastrophe that continues to unfold in Ukraine, and that we have discussed before and will again, continues to reverberate around the world, and it must end. Civilians and civilian infrastructure, as so often stated, must be respected. As the Secretary-General stated yesterday, the destruction of civilian infrastructure in Ukrainian ports, we both referred to this, may also constitute a violation of international humanitarian law. The bottom line is very simple. Food and fertilizer exports from Ukraine and Russian Federation remain still today, despite recent days, of crucial importance to global food security. The United Nations will therefore continue its engagement with all involved to ensure that Russian and Ukrainian food and fertilizer can continue to reach global markets. Unified international support, and I hope from this Council also, is essential if these efforts of advocacy and diplomacy are to be successful. And I want, of course, to reiterate our appreciation of the extraordinary efforts of the government of Turkey in support of and hosting and overseeing so much of the Black Sea Initiative. Madam President, a final, perhaps personal impression. We have all been so deep in the weeds in this project for so long, and therefore this week has been a week of sadness and disappointment. But for many of those 362 million people, it's not a matter of sadness or disappointment. It's a matter of threat to their future and the future of their children and their families. They're not sad, they're angry, they're worried, they're concerned. Some will go hungry, some will starve, many may die as a result of these decisions. And we implore this Council and the world beyond it to help to make every effort to restore the spirit, what the Secretary-General at the time referred to as the beacon of hope, that those two agreements represented for all of us in a world of such difficulty and tragedy. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Griffiths for his briefing. I now give the floor to the briefer requested by the Russian Federation, Mr. Mikhail Khazin.
Госпожа председатель, уважаемые участники заседания, я, как экономист, постараюсь дать более-менее объективную экономическую картину всех договоренностей по зерновой сделке. Прежде всего, нужно сказать, что не существует на сегодня никаких объективных критериев оценки изменения цен на рынках в связи с этой сделкой. Да, когда она была сделана, произошло резкое снижение цен, но это связано с тем, что в прошлом году было уникальное сочетание неблагоприятных обстоятельств. И надо учесть, что начало сделки совпало с прогнозами на будущий урожай, который был благоприятный. Падение цен ожидалось, и, в общем, ничего удивительного в этом нет. Если смотреть на объемы зерна, поставляемые Украиной, то нужно отметить, что большая часть там составляет кукуруза и ячмень, которые, собственно, не поставляются бедным странам, они в продовольственной программе для них не используются. Если мы будем говорить только о пшенице, то 30 миллионов тонн, которые были поставлены по морю, примерно сравнимый масштаб был поставлен Украиной на экспорт по другим каналам. И нужно учесть, что это зерно было коммерческое, оно принадлежало частным лицам и было уже законтрактовано. То есть его влияние на рынки в прошлом году было связано с тем, что это зерно уже было учтено в текущем балансе. Если мы будем смотреть на ситуацию перспектив годовой давности, двухлетней, то картина будет другая. В частности, например, экспорт зерна из России вырос за последний год, и Россия существенно увеличила поставки пшеницы. Вместо 35 миллионов тонн 58. И примерно такой же объем будет поставлен, скорее всего, в следующем году, поскольку падение урожая в этом году в России незначительно, где-то от 4 до 5%. Нужно учесть, что как раз в связи с тем, что это зерно не носило гуманитарный характер, это коммерческое зерно, то его влияние на поставки в бедные страны абсолютно незначительно. То есть в самые бедные страны пришлось всего 3% этого зерна. И таким образом качественная оценка влияния зерновой сделки с точки зрения поставок украинского зерна на мировые рынки в общем не очень значительна. Точные оценки, как я уже говорил, сделать практически невозможно в связи с тем, что рынки последние годы находятся в чрезвычайно разбалансированном состоянии. Можно отметить, просто для понимания того, насколько сложная сейчас ситуация на рынках, что в Соединенных Штатах Америки промышленная инфляция год назад была больше 20%, а сегодня, через год, она составляет минус 9%. То есть пошли дефляционные процессы. Это означает, что совершенно невозможно дать сколько-нибудь стабильный прогноз ситуации и реакции рынка на те или иные факторы. Скорее всего, это реакция на карантин 19-20 года, но еще в ближайшие несколько лет эта реакция будет в очень сильной форме. А вот теперь нужно сказать о второй части зерновой сделки. Дело в том, что участие России в экспорте зерна составляет примерно треть, то есть около 60 миллионов тонн, а рынок 160-180. И по этой причине уход российского зерна с этого рынка, вот это действительно вызовет коллапс. А беда состоит в том, что то влияние, которое оказывает санкционная политика на логистическую ситуацию, на финансовую ситуацию, приводит к тому, что производство зерна в России становится для экспорта нерентабельным. В этом году такой проблемы пока нет. Но вот в следующем году может оказаться, что поставки российского зерна на рынке из-за такой политики резко упадут. И вот это будет реально катастрофа на рынках. Тут цены вырастут очень сильно. Дополнительным фактором здесь являются поставки российских удобрений. Россия занимает больше 15% мирового рынка удобрений, и значительную часть рынка тех веществ, из которых эти удобрения делаются. Аммиак в первую очередь. Удобрение – это будущий урожай. Если в этом году сократится количество удобрений, которые будут внесены на поля, то через год резко сократится урожай, причем по всему миру. То есть, иными словами, принимаемые сегодня решения по де-факто ограничению России, я сказал де-факто вот почему. Формально и ООН, и Соединенные Штаты Америки неоднократно говорили, что продовольствие не относится к сфере ограничений. Но давление на экономические субъекты настолько велико, что многие из них отказываются взаимодействовать с Россией по поставке продовольствия и удобрений. И вот это неминуемо вызовет очень серьезные проблемы и очень сильную нехватку зерна на мировых рынках в интервале 1-2 года. Мы не можем сегодня сказать, к какому росту цен это приведет. Ровно потому, что рынки очень разбалансированы. Не исключено, что в результате произойдет распад единых мировых рынков продовольствия на какие-то региональные группы, о чем уже много где говорят и пишут. С точки зрения эффективности поставок продовольствия и тем более с точки зрения гуманитарных функций, это чрезвычайно опасная ситуация, в связи с чем мне хотелось бы в заключении сказать следующее. К сожалению, действительно есть проблемы с реализацией и первой сделки с участием Украины, и второй с участием России. Но с точки зрения влияния и на общие мировые рынки, и на гуманитарную составляющую, ограничения для России представляются куда более опасными, чем, собственно, экспорт Украины. Тем более, что
I think we might have lost Mr. Khazin. Can you hear us, Mr. Khazin? While we sort out that problem, I suggest we move on to those council members who wish to make statements. Oh, Mr. Khazin is back. I'm sorry, we lost you momentarily. Please carry on.
Да. Мне осталось сказать одну фразу. Я хотел сказать, что сделка с участием России окажет куда большее влияние на цены на продовольственных рынках и на гуманитарную составляющую, чем та сделка, которая связана с Украиной. И мне кажется, что она должна занимать более важное место в обсуждении для того, чтобы она выполнялась. Спасибо, благодарю за внимание.
I take note of Mr. Khazin's briefing, and I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gustavo Manrique, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Human Mobility of Ecuador.
Muchas gracias. Señora Presidenta, agradezco por haber convocado a esta sesión a pedido de Francia y Ecuador. Aprecio también las exposiciones informativas del Secretario General Adjunto de Asuntos Humanitarios, el señor Martin Griffith, y de la Secretaria General Adjunta de Asuntos Políticos y Consolidación de la Paz, la señora Rosemary Di Carlo. Escuché con atención también al señor Casín. Mañana, 22 de julio, se cumple el primer año desde la firma de la iniciativa de los cereales del Mar Negro, que el secretario general la calificó como un faro de esperanza. Es lamentable que en lugar de avivarse esa llama, se lleven a cabo acciones que puedan apagarla. Deploro el anuncio de la Federación Rusa de suspender su participación en la referida iniciativa. Esta ha sido central para aliviar las consecuencias globales de la inseguridad alimentaria que ha sido exacerbada por la agresión militar contra Ucrania. Desde el inicio de la invasión, el secretario general alertó de las consecuencias globales que el conflicto tendría. Esto con mayor dureza sobre las personas con menos recursos, al haber interrumpido la cadena de suministros, llevando el índice de precios de alimentos de la FAO al nivel más alto de la historia. En marzo del 2022, el Ecuador acogió la conferencia regional de la FAO a pocas semanas de haber iniciado la guerra. Las consecuencias regionales y globales se manifestaron desde entonces como una preocupación fundamental para América Latina y el Caribe. Si bien las exportaciones de cereales no constituyen de por sí operaciones de ayuda alimentaria, siguen teniendo un rol vital en el alivio de la inseguridad alimentaria y, por tanto, en la situación humanitaria del mundo. La implementación de la iniciativa del grano ha permitido salvar millones de vidas del hambre, en particular en las zonas más frágiles. Así lo ha confirmado en reiteradas ocasiones la FAO o incluso la Conferencia de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Comercio y el Desarrollo, UNCTAD. A esto debemos agregar el impacto que la suspensión tendrá en el marco de las operaciones del Programa Mundial de Alimentos, que beneficiaba a miles de niñas y niños en Afganistán, Yemen y el Cuerno de África, por mencionar solo unos pocos ejemplos. ¿Qué peor manera de implementar la resolución 2417, con la cual este Consejo, hace 5 años, instó a todas las partes a garantizar el buen funcionamiento de los sistemas y mercados de alimentación en situaciones de conflicto armado? ¿Y qué peor manera de acompañar la decisión de suspender la iniciativa del grano que bombardeando las ciudades portuarias de Ucrania y la infraestructura de carga de cereales, precisamente en Odessa? Además, serían inaceptables cualquier amenaza o ataque contra embarcaciones civiles en el Mar Negro. El Ecuador insiste en la necesidad de respetar los sistemas de alimentos y de abastecimiento de agua y recuerda la prohibición existente de atacar, destruir, sustraer o inutilizar los bienes indispensables para la supervivencia de la población civil, incluyendo bienes agrícolas y de cosecha. Por otro lado, nos aflige el impacto cada vez mayor que esta invasión tiene sobre la agricultura y los medios de subsistencia rurales en Ucrania. Esto con decenas de miles de millones de pérdidas para los hogares, destrucción de maquinaria y equipo, instalaciones de almacenamiento, cultivos, insumos y las 600.000 hectáreas de tierra agrícola que nos comentaron. Señora Presidenta, deben parar los ataques contra el personal de respuesta humanitaria y sus sedes, incluyendo Odessa, Mykolaiv, y le insistimos a la Federación Rusa que permita el acceso humanitario en las zonas bajo su control temporal. Insistimos en la necesidad de que las partes respeten irrestrictamente sus obligaciones que derivan del derecho internacional humanitario, incluyendo los principios de distinción, proporcionalidad y de precaución. Nos preocupa la contaminación por minas y remanentes explosivos. Llamamos a las partes a abstenerse de emplear municiones de racimos por el daño colateral que éstas conllevan en lo inmediato, así como en el mediano y largo plazo. El Ecuador, como Estado parte de la Convención sobre Municiones en Racimo, insiste en la prohibición de ese armamento. Finalmente, hacemos un llamado firme para que este Consejo reitere su respaldo a las labores del secretario general, como ya lo hizo en mayo del 2022. Esa labor seguirá siendo indispensable tanto en el plano humanitario como en los esfuerzos para acercarnos hacia una paz justa y duradera. Esto lo debemos hacer sobre los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Manrique for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, je remercie Madame Di Carlo et Monsieur Griffith pour leur présentation. La France a demandé avec l'Équateur la tenue de cette réunion, car la Russie a franchi cette semaine un nouveau seuil dans le cynisme et l'irresponsabilité. Nous l'avons tous entendu prétendre ces derniers mois qu'elle était très préoccupée par la situation des pays les plus pauvres. Après avoir mis en péril la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition mondiale en agressant l'Ukraine, elle a mis fin il y a quelques jours à l'initiative céréalière de la mer Noire. Le secrétaire général a souligné le grave impact que cela aurait sur les pays les plus vulnérables. Depuis, elle bombarde les ports d'Odessa, de Tchornomorsk et de Mykolaïev et leurs terminaux céréaliers, qui sont des infrastructures civiles. Le secrétaire général l'a rappelé hier, la destruction d'infrastructures civiles est une violation du droit international humanitaire. Alors que des millions de personnes souffrent de la faim, la Russie aurait déjà détruit plus de 60 000 tonnes de céréales. Elle a aussi annoncé, via son ministère de la Défense, que tous les navires se dirigeant vers les ports ukrainiens de la mer Noire seront considérés, à compter du 20 juillet à minuit, comme transportant potentiellement des biens ou équipements de nature militaire. Avec ces actions, la Russie commet encore d'autres crimes de guerre, utilise de nouveau la faim comme une arme. Elle commet une erreur stratégique. Madame la Présidente, la France condamne dans les termes les plus fermes la décision de la Russie de mettre fin à l'initiative céréalière de la mer Noire. Elle assume ainsi de porter la responsabilité de l'insécurité alimentaire et de la malnutrition mondiale. Cette initiative avait permis en un an l'exportation de près de 33 millions de tonnes de céréales, dont plus de la moitié vers les pays à faible et moyen revenus, et une baisse des prix des produits agricoles de 23%. Le programme alimentaire mondial avait pu exporter depuis les ports ukrainiens 725 000 tonnes de céréales vers les pays les plus touchés par la faim, notamment l'Afghanistan, le Yémen et la Corne de l'Afrique. La fermeture de la mer Noire va entraîner une augmentation du coût des opérations humanitaires dans un contexte où les ressources manquent déjà cruellement. Elle risque aussi et surtout d'entraîner des effets d'inflation qui affecteront au premier chef les secteurs agricoles et alimentaires, les producteurs et les ménages pauvres dans les pays les plus vulnérables. Pourquoi la Russie a-t-elle fait ce choix? En bloquant les exportations depuis les ports ukrainiens et en faisant monter les prix agricoles et alimentaires, la Russie augmente le bénéfice de ses propres exportations. Elle accroît ses revenus pour financer sa guerre d'agression contre l'Ukraine. Voilà la réalité. La Russie cherche à se poser en victime et prétend avoir été flouée avec les accords d'Istanbul. Pourtant, le secrétaire général l'a indiqué dans sa déclaration du 17 juillet, les exportations de céréales russes ont atteint des niveaux particulièrement élevés depuis l'été dernier et le niveau de ces exportations d'engrais est presque revenu à ce qu'il était avant l'invasion du 24 février 2022. Madame la Présidente, la France salue les efforts du secrétaire général et de la Turquie qui auront essayé jusqu'au bout et continuent d'essayer de sauver l'initiative. Les Nations Unies ont travaillé sans relâche pour proposer des solutions. Or, la Russie n'a même pas daigné répondre à leurs propositions. La France continuera pour sa part, avec ses partenaires, à intensifier son action pour réduire les risques d'insécurité alimentaire. Elle a porté son aide en matière de sécurité alimentaire, de nutrition et de développement agricole durable à 840 millions d'euros en 2022. Dès hier, le Conseil de l'Union européenne a décidé de renforcer les capacités d'exportation des corridors de solidarité de l'Union européenne, qui jouent un rôle essentiel et ont permis d'acheminer 41 millions de tonnes de céréales hors d'Ukraine depuis mars 2022. Madame la Présidente, cette décision de la Russie de mettre fin à l'initiative céréalière de la mer Noire vient amplifier les conséquences négatives de l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine. redisons-le ici, rien de tout cela ne se passerait si la Russie n'avait pas en premier lieu envahi l'Ukraine. Nous l'appelons donc à nouveau à cesser son agression et à retirer ses troupes du territoire ukrainien. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Madam President, I thank France and Ecuador for calling for this meeting and the briefers for their perspectives. As Ghana understands it, until there's a fundamental shift in the position of the Russian Federation, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which was terminated on 17 July, has no further hope of implementation. As diplomats, however, we possess, through dialogue and diplomacy, the capacity to bring hope where hope has been lost, and new life when arrangements we have developed to serve our common interest are struggling to meet our expectations. Therefore, as deeply disappointed as we were with the non-renewal of the initiative, we encourage additional efforts by the United Nations and all countries that have had a role to play in the initiative to help address the concerns that have consistently been expressed with regards to the ancillary MOU, especially relating to the export of Russian ammonia to global markets and the export of agricultural products and fertilizers. For indeed, we believe that despite any limitations that the initiative may have had, it has played a role in the stabilization of the global food prices since July 2022, through the export of more than 32 million tons of food commodities from Ukraine, including the transportation of over 725,000 tons of wheat to countries that desperately needed food stocks under the World Food Programme. The initiative was also a test of how we could create resilience in food supply chains during times of major crisis. While we can learn from the present lessons, its termination would not serve the wider international interest and the cause of global food security. Madam President, we, however, hold that to sustainably address the knock-on effects that the termination of the initiative could create, we need to double our efforts in finding a path of peace that is acceptable to both parties in the conflict. As we've stated before, the further militarization of the conflict is not likely to significantly change the dynamics on the ground. It would prolong the suffering on both sides and the misery of the world. We therefore reiterate our call on Ukraine and the Russian Federation to cease hostilities and embrace dialogue and diplomacy if they have an interest for long-term peace. As neighbors, we believe they have no choice but to find a way they can peacefully adjust their differences. To consider the possibility of other options may not be a realistic choice. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Je remercie le sous-secrétaire général Martin Griffith, la sous-secrétaire Rosemary Di Carlo pour leur exposé et les informations fournies. Nous avons également suivi avec attention la déclaration de M. Michael Kazin. L'Équateur et la France ont proposé la tenue de cette réunion au lendemain de la suspension de l'accord sur l'initiative des céréales en mer Noire. Un accord signé en juillet 2022 qui avait suscité beaucoup d'espoir et fait espérer une certaine accalmie, notamment sur le volet de la sécurité alimentaire. Le conflit armé en Ukraine, que nous suivons avec une grande attention et appréhension depuis des mois, est sur le point de prendre une autre tournure aussi dangereuse que la précédente. L'accord quadripartite entre la Russie et l'Ukraine, sous l'égide des Nations Unies et de la Turquie, a garanti pendant toute une année l'exportation sécurisée des céréales via la mer Noire. Et cela a permis d'éviter un tant soit peu la flambée des prix des céréales ainsi que le risque d'insécurité alimentaire dans certaines régions, comme la Corne de l'Afrique, qui souffre de sécheresses récurrentes. Aujourd'hui, avec le contexte économique mondial fortement impacté par la multiplicité des crises, notamment les crises humanitaires, la facture, l'instabilité pourrait s'alourdir. Nous exhortons donc les parties à investir leurs efforts dans le dialogue pour trouver une solution diplomatique économique profitable à tous. Nous exhortons également le secrétaire général des Nations Unies à poursuivre ces échanges avec les parties afin de lever l'impasse actuelle. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President, and let me thank USG DiCarlo and USG Griffiths for their remarks. Before the special military aggression, Ukraine, one of the breadbaskets of the world, accounted for 12% of corn and around 10% of wheat exports. It produced enough food to feed 400 million people per year, mainly in the countries in Africa and the Middle East. Since 24 February 2021, to have their usual food, those millions needed to have the permission from Russia. Colleagues, last year, with the beginning of the unjustified war in Ukraine, the world went through tremor shocks because of the sudden sharp increase of food prices. Food insecurity disrupted global markets, punished households, and terrified governments. Russia scrambled to explain to a disbelieving world its narrative that it was a consequence of the sanctions imposed on it. It made some noise, but failed to convince anyone, just like for almost everything related to its war. Then came the Black Sea Grain Initiative, one of the few positive news and achievements on the diplomatic front, and thanks to sincere efforts by Turkey and the Secretary General. It suddenly eased the markets, stabilized the prices, and calmed the world. It was a beacon of reason in an ocean of despair. The narrative of the sanctions disappeared, and the world, especially the global south, breathed with relief. And indeed, about 61% of the nearly 33 million tons of exported grain out of Ukraine has shipped to low and middle-income countries, including 65% of wheat alone, until the 27th of July, when Russia decided it was time to gamble again. To be fair, it did not come as a surprise. Russia has long been nervous and unhappy with the deal, and it did not hide it. In October last year, there were 10 ships inspected per day, then 7 in November, falling down to 2 in May, while the real capacity for inspection was for 40 ships a day. On the other side, Russian food exports, not under any sanction, it must be highlighted, are higher than last year, and it is exporting plenty of grain and fertilizers out of Novorossiysk. So what is wrong? In the course of these long months of war, we have learned that in order to understand the reality, one should not rely on what Russia says, but rather on what it omits. Kremlin is now conditioning any future participation in the grain deal as a chip to get EU sanctions relief. Russian agriculture producers have been complaining about prices in global markets for these commodities. They wanted to make more money, and for that, you need to increase the price. In the world that we have built, a quick reference to the international rules-based order, this is done by fair competition, not brutal imposition. But this is what Russia tries to do with its oil. This is what they did with their gas, and now again with food. In a war that they are not winning, everything must be used as a weapon. Colleagues, Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports has since the very first day been a deliberate effort to strangle Ukraine's economy. After more than 500 days of a disastrous war, the goal remains the same, just as it is destroying its civilian infrastructure, just like it is killing its people, just like it is abducting its children. Now, as mentioned by USG DiCarlo and other colleagues, Russia is attacking on a daily basis with the aim to destroy Ukraine's ports, including in Odessa, a city inscribed in the World Heritage List by UNESCO. But Russia is not punishing Ukraine only. Ending the deal would destabilize global food prices and jeopardize the most food-insecure countries and populations at a time when climate change, conflict, political instability, and other factors have already caused rising levels of food insecurity. According to UN Comtrade, imports from Ukraine as a share of total wheat imports count for 75% for Lebanon, 59% for Pakistan, 49% for Libya, and 45% for Ethiopia, to mention just a few out of a long list of countries. If the loaf of bread will cost more or will just be missing from the usual shelves in dozens of countries, people must know who to blame. Because killing the deal equals to playing Russian roulette with the food of the poor and the needs of the hungry. maybe not everyone can immediately understand that one man is ready to starve people around the world for his own political survivor, to justify his terrible mistakes and excuse his horrible wrong judgment. But it is just a matter of time until everyone understands that by trying to mimic strength at the expense of the hungry, he is only showing his weakness and his cynicism. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais commencer par remercier la secrétaire générale adjointe Rosemary Di Carlo et le secrétaire général adjoint Martin Griffiths, non seulement de leurs exposés, mais au nom de mon pays, la Suisse, j'aimerais exprimer notre profonde reconnaissance pour leur travail inlassable afin de soulager les souffrances de la population civile. Une fois de plus, nous sommes arrivés à la fin d'une semaine chargée de sombres nouvelles en lien avec l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. De nouvelles attaques, de nouvelles victimes civiles et de nouvelles destructions. Plus d'incertitudes également pour les habitantes et habitants de l'Ukraine, mais aussi du monde entier. D'après des rapports crédibles, à Mykolaiv, près d'Odessa, une frappe aérienne a touché hier des maisons et une crèche. Une crèche. Ces attaques sont tout aussi cruelles que inadmissibles. La Suisse est extrêmement préoccupée par cette escalade apparente touchant à nouveau des civils et des infrastructures civiles dans le sud de l'Ukraine. Nous rappelons que le droit international humanitaire interdit les attaques contre la population et les infrastructures civiles, ainsi que les représailles, notamment contre les personnes et biens protégés. Les règles relatives à la conduite des hostilités doivent impérativement être respectées. Nous nous joignons également à la condamnation des frappes russes contre les installations portuaires d'Odessa et d'autres ports ukrainiens de la mer Noire. Ces dernières, tout comme la décision prise par la Russie concernant l'initiative de la mer Noire, ont des répercussions qui vont bien au-delà de l'Ukraine. Les accords signés à Istanbul il y a un an se sont révélés essentiels pour la sécurité alimentaire dans le monde entier, nous l'avons entendu. L'initiative de la mer Noire a permis l'exportation de plus de 32 millions de tonnes de nourriture depuis l'Ukraine dans 45 pays sur 3 continents. Elle a contribué à réduire les prix des denrées alimentaires au niveau mondial et rendu possible l'expédition de plus de 725 000 tonnes de blé par le Programme alimentaire mondial pour soutenir les opérations humanitaires. Nous réaffirmons notre profond regret face à la décision de la Russie de ne pas prolonger cette initiative. Nous craignons que cette décision aggrave les situations de détresse et affecte particulièrement les personnes les plus pauvres. Nous nous inquiétons également du risque de déstabilisation que l'insécurité alimentaire représente dans de nombreuses régions de ce monde. La Suisse est convaincue qu'il est dans l'intérêt de la sécurité alimentaire mondiale que l'initiative soit reconduite. Nous sommes préoccupés par l'escalade militaire ainsi que dans la rhétorique depuis la décision russe et appelons à s'abstenir de tout acte préjudiciable, notamment à l'égard de la navigation civile. Nous saluons les efforts inlassables du secrétaire général, comme de la Turquie et de tous les acteurs et actrices impliqués pour faciliter l'accès rapide et sans entrave aux marchés mondiaux des produits alimentaires et des engrais en provenance de l'Ukraine et de la Russie. Nous continuons à nous tenir prêts à soutenir ces efforts, notamment dans notre rôle d'État hôte. Madame la Présidente, la signature des accords à Istanbul, d'autres l'ont dit il y a un an, a constitué l'un des rares moments d'espoir depuis le début de l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Cela a prouvé que même dans les heures les plus sombres, des solutions diplomatiques peuvent être trouvées dans l'intérêt d'un objectif plus large. Un rappel que l'humanité et l'égard envers les plus vulnérables doit et peut l'emporter. Les événements de cette semaine sont contraires à ce que nous réclamons depuis février 2022. Cette tendance à l'escalade doit impérativement cesser. Plus cette agression militaire perdure, plus grandes sont ses répercussions. Nous réitérons donc notre appel à la Russie et nous le ferons à nouveau à entamer une désescalade de la situation, à cesser les opérations de combat et à retirer ses troupes du territoire ukrainien. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席女士，我感谢迪卡洛副秘书长和格里菲斯副秘书长的通报。我也认真听取了哈金先生的发言。黑海粮食外运协议 以及关于俄罗斯粮食化肥出口的谅解备忘录，对于保障全球粮食供应、稳定全球粮食市场具有重要意义，应该得到均衡、全面、有效的执行，并解决好有关方面的合理关切。俄罗斯近日多次表示，如果能够在消除俄罗斯粮食化肥出口障碍方面取得切实进展，俄方愿考虑恢复黑海粮食外运协议。古特雷斯秘书长也表示，将继续为乌克兰和俄罗斯的粮食化肥进入国际市场进行努力。中方希望有关各方从维护国际粮食安全大局出发，特别是从缓解发展中国家粮食危机出发，同联合国有关机构共同努力，加紧对话协商，坚持相向而行，争取平衡解决各方合理关切，早日恢复俄罗斯与乌克兰粮食与化肥的出口。一段时间以来，乌克兰地面形势持续升级，扩大化趋势愈发明显，多处重要的民用基础设施遇袭。中方呼吁当事方保持冷静克制，严格遵循国际人道法，严格遵守必要、区分和对称的原则，避免袭击平民和民用基础设施，全力遏制冲突扩大化趋势，防止引发更大规模的人道危机。主席女士，解决乌克兰危机引发的有关问题的根本之道，在于实现乌克兰问题的政治解决。中方再次呼吁冲突当事方尽快重启和谈，呼吁国际社会为此创造良好条件。在乌克兰问题上，中方一贯主张，各国主权领土完整都应得到维护，联合国宪章宗旨原则都应该得到遵守，各方合理安全关切都应该得到重视，一切有利于和平解决危机的努力都应该得到支持。中方将继续站在和平一边，站在对话一边，同国际社会一道，为推动乌克兰问题的政治解决付出不懈努力。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you to Undersecretary Generals Griffiths and DiCarlo for your sobering briefing. And I want to express our appreciation to Ecuador and France for calling this important meeting. Colleagues, it seems every single week Russia stoops to a new low. Last week, Russia unilaterally blocked a compromise resolution that would have extended cross-border assistance to Syrians in dire need. And this week, Russia suspended its participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, an arrangement that has helped feed the world's most vulnerable, particularly people in the Middle East and Africa. We heard from our briefers that this is trivia, but ask the people who are receiving this aid if they think it's trivia. This Wednesday, the Kremlin unleashed missiles and drones on Ukrainian ports, killing and wounding civilians and destroying 60,000 tons of grain. 60,000 tons of grain. According to the World Food Program, that is enough to feed more than 270,000 people for a year. This week, Russia also announced that all ships proceeding to Ukrainian ports in Black Sea waters will be considered potential carriers of military cargo, which could have been avoided with the inspections that were provided under the initiative. And just last night, reports indicate that Russia carried out yet another round of attacks in the Odessa region. Russia is waging war on the world's food supply. It is waging war on the poor at a time when needs are so dire, and you've heard that people are angry and people will die. And the United States has information that the Russian military may expand its targeting of Ukrainian grain facilities to include attacks against civilian shipping in the Black Sea. Our information also indicates that Russia laid additional sea mines in the approaches to Ukrainian ports. We believe this is a coordinated effort to justify any attacks against civilian ships in the Black Sea and lay blame on Ukraine for these attacks. After more than 500 days of President Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it's easy to become numb to Russia's campaign of cruelty. But we cannot become numb. This is not normal. This is not the behavior of a responsible country, of a permanent member of this council. This council is charged with maintaining international peace and security. But Russia has upended peace and security around the world. Its actions fly in the face of everything this council stands for. From the earliest days of its unprovoked illegal war against Ukraine, Russia has weaponized food. Russian forces have turned Ukraine's rolling wheat fields into battlefields. They have spoiled fields with mines and bombs, and they have stolen and destroyed vital agricultural equipment and infrastructure. Moscow must cease its attacks on Ukraine's agricultural land and infrastructure. Even when Russia was party to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, it refused to fully implement the arrangement and so often obstructed ships full of food from leaving port. Despite this, the Black Sea Grain Initiative was making a real difference. It was helping feed the world. This is not trivia, as we have been made to believe. This arrangement has brought stability to global food markets and lowered food prices for all. It has bolstered the World Food Programme's humanitarian work in places like Afghanistan, Somalia, and Yemen. And it has facilitated the export of 32 million metric tons of Ukrainian grain and foodstuff. That's the equivalent of 18 billion loaves of bread. And we know that more than 2/3 of food exports through this arrangement went to developing countries. The first ship that left the Black Sea under this arrangement brought grain to Lebanon. And since then, thanks to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, ships have brought food into ports across Africa and the Middle East, from Sudan to Ethiopia to Libya. But the very day Russia suspended its participation in the initiative, global grain prices rose sharply. Russian exporters are already benefiting, while millions who cannot afford higher priced grain suffer, especially people in the Middle East and Africa. Let's be clear. Russia has zero legitimate reason to suspend its participation in this arrangement. They would have you believe that sanctions have blocked their exports. That couldn't be further from the truth. They were exporting more grains than ever before and at higher prices. Russia is simply using the Black Sea as blackmail. It's playing political games. It's holding humanity hostage. Colleagues, the United Nations and Turkey have said publicly they want this arrangement to continue. Ukraine has said publicly it wants this arrangement to continue. The world clearly wants this arrangement to continue. Now the eyes of the world are on you, Russia. It is not too late for Moscow to reverse this decision and extend, expand, and fully implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative. I want to take this opportunity to thank the United Nations and Turkey for all they have done to try to keep this arrangement alive. This Council and all member states must come together and urge Russia to resume negotiations in good faith and end this atrocious war in Ukraine. For the good of the world, for the good of the world's most hungry, for the good of humanity. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the United States for their statement, and I now give the floor to Mozambique.
Madam President, I wish to express Mozambique's gratitude to the Presidency for convening this important meeting. I also wish to thank the briefers. Madam President, the Black Sea Initiative was a life-standing arrangement brokered by the United Nations Secretary General, We prize such initiative. It enabled nearly 32 million tons of Ukrainian grain to reach global markets, nearby mitigating the needs of people around the globe. The Secretary General had rightly lauded this initiative as a beacon of hope in a troubling world. The suspension of this initiative is a certain to amplify global socio-economic stresses in a world already grappling with a perfect storm of conflict, climate change, and a dwindling confidence in our collective ability to negotiate and adhere to multilateral solutions. We are told that global food indexes are already showing sharp increase. Humanitarian agencies are preparing for potential food shortages and increased hunger in conflict-affected areas. Madam President, we acknowledge the concerns regarding the implementations of twin memorandum that facilitates the export of grain and agricultural products. According to UN data, around 3% of export under Black Sea deal is gone to low-income countries, while high-income countries get around 44%, and the rest to the mid-income states. Mozambique, therefore, urges all parties and guarantors of the Black Sea Grain Initiative to follow the example set by Secretary General, who reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to facilitating the transport of the food products and fertilizers from both Ukraine and Russia to international markets. We urge all parties to see aside their differences, bearing in mind the hardship that is likely to be caused by suspensions of this arrangement. Once again, we are in the presence of one more lesson that bears testimony to the fact that humanitarian problems require a political solution. In this regard, Mozambique reiterates its call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the resumption of direct negotiations between the parties in full compliance with the purposes and principles of UN Charter. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Madam President, I'd like to thank Undersecretary General DiCarlo and Undersecretary General Griffiths for their informative briefings, and we listened carefully to Mr. Mikhail Khazin. I also welcome the participation of Ukraine in this meeting. Earlier this week, the Council convened shortly after the news that the Black Sea Grain Initiative would not be extended. In the short time since, wheat futures have continued to rise, portending further difficulties for developing countries in securing necessary staples. If nothing is done, this will lead to heightened hunger and food insecurity. After a year of respite during which the Black Sea Grain Initiative contributed to a fall in prices, the world now faces the threat of destabilized markets and food shortages, yet again for the most vulnerable. The initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding on the export of Russian fertilizers and food products have indeed had a significant impact on global food security. These agreements were not perfect by any means, yet they resulted in over 32 million metric tons of Ukrainian grain and foodstuffs being shipped to the world. As such, they fast became a lifeline for those who needed them most. The UAE deeply regrets that the initiative has not been extended. That said, we commend the ongoing efforts of the Secretary General and the United Nations to facilitate the continued transport of food products and fertilizers from both Ukraine and Russia to international markets. The Black Sea Grain Initiative was born out of extensive diplomatic efforts and dialogue, one of very few positive developments amidst the shadow of war in Ukraine throughout the past 18 months. Now is not the time to walk away. On the contrary, it is time to build on any positive steps to secure a new way forward. Madam President, this conflict is not the sole reason for the food insecurity crisis we face. The World Food Programme's increasingly dire warnings about rising food prices precede the war, but the events of the last year and a half have significantly exacerbated this trend. Most member states continue to call for an end to this war, a war that has visited immense suffering upon Ukrainians, compounded hardships for hundreds of millions of people around the world, and strained the multilateral system. While it is vital that Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizer return to global markets, we must not let this issue obscure the wider context. Ultimately, only peace, just and sustainable, will help rectify the turmoil we are seeing both within and beyond Ukraine. This is what the overwhelming majority of UN member states have called for, a peace that is in line with the UN Charter and respects Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And I also thank USG DiCarlo and USG Griffiths for their briefings. Malta strongly condemns Russia's unilateral decision to terminate the Black Sea Grains Initiative. We see this decision for what it is, yet another regrettable example of the politicization of humanitarian needs that will only exacerbate the global food security crisis. It is evident to all that the onus of this development lies squarely on the Russian Federation. The weaponization of food is completely unacceptable and unconscionable. It is essential to restore the Black Sea Grain Initiative, rebalance the global food market, and contribute to Ukraine's export of grains to the countries that need it the most. The Black Sea Grains Initiative has played a vital role in facilitating Ukraine's grain exports to international markets since its creation. Since its implementation, the initiative ensured the safe passage of over 32 million metric tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports. The initiative also has enabled the shipment of a significant quantity of grain through vessels chartered by the World Food Programme, providing essential support to their humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. Despite the Russian Federation's claims to the contrary, over half of the grain and two-thirds of the wheat from the initiative has gone to developing countries, including some of the most food-insecure regions of the globe, like the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, Yemen, and Afghanistan. The BSGI has helped lower food prices by almost a quarter since March 2022. Every shipment has contributed to reducing hardship in the world's poorest countries, since bringing grain to the world markets lowers food prices for all. President, Malta strongly condemns the recent Russian attacks against the southern Ukrainian ports of Chornomorsk, which destroyed 60,000 tons of wheat destined for China and grain export infrastructure. We also condemn the continued nighttime bombings in and around the ports of Odessa and Mykolaiv. These deplorable acts are designed to degrade the functioning of infrastructure essential for Ukrainian exports. We also express our deep concern about official Russian statements indicating that all ships sailing to the Ukrainian Black Sea ports will be seen as potential military targets. Russia must cease illegally blocking Ukrainian seaports and allow freedom of navigation on the Black Sea. Closing the Black Sea humanitarian corridor would impact the crop for the upcoming season. Farmers in Ukraine will be reluctant to plant it if there is no viable way to get their crops to market. This will be felt by the most vulnerable populations, who will have no choice but to pay higher prices for food. In response to this, I can confirm that the EU solidarity lanes will continue to assist Ukraine in various ways to facilitate the exporting of agricultural goods worldwide. Food security all over the globe is now at great risk. By persisting in the instrumentalization of food resources, Russia is responsible for the widespread disturbances in global grain deliveries and the exacerbation of food price inflation on an international scale. A lack of food supplies produces knock-on effects on the lives of millions of people, hitting them hard in the areas of health, education, and social cohesion. Malta urgently calls upon Russia to change course on its decision and immediately resume the implementation of the Black Sea Grains Initiative. Cooperation and stability in food products and fertilizers are vital to ensure food security and alleviate the suffering of vulnerable populations in regions heavily reliant on these supplies. President, today's meeting illustrates once again the far-reaching consequences of this senseless, illegal, and unprovoked war. It was another stark reminder of its devastating repercussions on not just the region, but the rest of the world. We cannot but reiterate in the strongest possible terms the need for Russia to end its aggression and to immediately and completely withdraw all its forces and military equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
I thank Mr. Griffiths, Ms. DiCarlo, and the civil society briefer for their briefings. The global food supply, already compromised by various factors, has been further exacerbated by Russia's aggression against Ukraine for over 500 days now. Sadly, this situation has deteriorated even further following Russia's decision on July 17th to terminate the Black Sea Grain Initiative, BSGI. Japan condemns this deplorable action by Russia, noting that Russia has already been a significant impediment to the proper functioning of this initiative for several months. Since its initiation last year, the BSGI has played a pivotal role in ensuring global food security. Through these initiatives, more than 32 million tons of grain and other commodities have been transported from Ukrainian ports. Furthermore, over 725,000 tons of grain have been distributed through the World Food Programme, aiding humanitarian operations in some of the most severely impacted areas globally, such as Afghanistan, Yemen, and the Horn of Africa. Despite the significant challenges posed by conflict, climate change, and escalating energy prices, the initiative has led to a remarkable reduction in food prices by over 23% since last March. Japan is gravely concerned about the adverse effects Russia's decision could have on global food supplies, particularly for vulnerable people. Indeed, it is alarming to witness the higher volatility in global wheat prices following Russia's various actions starting from the termination of the initiative. Russia also threatens to treat civilian vessels bound for Ukraine ports as potential military targets. It is Russia alone who must take responsibility for all the repercussions resulting from its decision. Japan categorically condemns Russia's attacks on Ukrainian Black Sea port areas, resulting in numerous civilian casualties and the reported destruction of at least 60,000 tons of essential grain destined for export. It is crucial to remember that the attacks on civilian infrastructure may constitute a violation of international humanitarian law. Madam President, we commend the painstaking efforts of the United Nations and the government of Turkey in the extension and implementation of the BSGI. I also wish to recall the Hiroshima Action Statement for Resilient Global Food Security issued in May, which advocates for the maximal and continued implementation of the BSGI. Japan strongly urges Russia to cease the weaponization of food, which will never work for legitimizing its heinous act of violence, and promptly return to the international framework to resume grain exports. Madam President, our collective commitment to mitigating global hunger and maintaining stable food prices worldwide must not falter. In this context, Japan supports the EU's Solidarity Lanes initiatives to transport Ukrainian grain and food by land. And for its part, Japan has committed more than $250 million to facilitate Ukrainians' grain exports and to provide food-related assistance to vulnerable people in regions such as the Middle East and Africa. Moreover, we have backed the restoration of Ukraine's agricultural production capacity, severely compromised by Russia's aggression. Earlier this year, in March, Japan supplies sunflower and corn seeds to 400 smallholder farmers in Kharkiv, with a particular focus on women and young farmers, where war has significantly reduced agricultural productivity and income. Madam President, Japan will continue its efforts to secure the global food supply, thereby contributing to the stabilization of global markets in partnership with the international community. Will we hear or heard some so-called objective analysis or arguments which aimed at minimizing the importance of the BSGI? But colleagues, we heard voices of concerns around this very table, especially from countries that could be directly hit. And also we are witnessing actions that obstruct Ukrainian agriculture export and production. So truth is simple. All these concerns or hardships are meaninglessly caused, or at least hugely exacerbated, by the unprovoked war. The most effective and straightforward solution to all of these concerns and hardships would be Russia's immediate and unconditional withdrawal of its forces from Ukraine to end the war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Благодарим вас за приглашение предложенного нами докладчика и рациональный подход к количеству делегаций, допущенных на этот раз по правилу 37. Уважаемые коллеги, мы внимательно выслушали ваше выступление и вновь поразились степенью цинизма западных членов Совета Безопасности, их стремлением скрыть правду и выдать желаемое за действительное. Большинство из вас в той или иной степени высказало сожаление в связи с прекращением функционирования так называемой зерновой инициативы, позволявшей поставлять украинское зерно на мировые рынки. У меня к вам вопрос. От чего вы, собственно, ожидали? Мы с первых дней обращали всеобщее внимание на то, что инициатива перестает соответствовать изначально заявленной цели и приобретает отчетливо выраженный коммерческий характер. Фактически с самого начала в отрыв среди закупщиков продовольствия из Украины вырвались развитые государства. Однако никаких шагов по выправлению этой тенденции так и не последовало. За время работы Черноморской инициативы в общей сложности было вывезено 32,8 миллиона тонн грузов, из которых более 70% направились в страны с высоким и выше среднего уровнями доходов, включая Европейский Союз. На долю беднейших государств, в частности Эфиопии, Йемена, Афганистана, Судана и Сомали, пришлось менее 3%. Такая география и коммерциализация изначально гуманитарной инициативы становится понятной, если учесть, что владельцами значительной части украинских пахотных земель, более 17 миллионов гектаров, являются западные корпорации Карджиль, Дюпонт и Монсанто. Именно они скупили украинские земли после снятия Киевом по требованию МВФ 20-летнего моратория на их продажу и стали главными бенефициарами украинского зернового экспорта. С другой стороны, европейцы, приобретающие по демпинговым ценам украинское продовольствие, затем перерабатывают его у себя и перепродают в качестве готовых изделий, готовых товаров с высокой добавленной стоимостью. То есть зарабатывают на этом дважды. Скажите, а при чем здесь задача обеспечения продовольствием беднейших стран, о которой мы сегодня опять услышали? Коллеги, если же действительно вести речь о насыщении мирового рынка продовольствием и глобальной продбезопасности, то в фокусе внимания должна быть Россия, а не Украина. Давайте сравним показатели производства зерновых в России и на Украине за прошлый год. На Украине оно составило порядка 55 миллионов тонн зерновых, из которых на экспорт пошло 47 миллионов тонн. При этом доля пшеницы составляет только 17 миллионов тонн. В России же было собрано 156 миллионов тонн зерна, из которых мы экспортировали 60 миллионов тонн, включая 48 миллионов тонн пшеницы. Сразу хочу оговориться, экспортировали не благодаря зерновой сделке, а вопреки тем препонам, которые нам создавали. Таким образом, простая арифметика наглядно демонстрирует, что Россия занимает 20% мирового рынка пшеницы, доля Украины – менее 5%. Так кто играет большую роль в глобальной продовольственной безопасности? Добавьте к пшенице производимые Россией удобрения, и картина станет еще яснее. Специалисты все прекрасно понимают. Именно поэтому составной частью сделки стал меморандум между Россией и ООН по экспорту российской сельхозпродукции и удобрений. Ни одно из его положений за год, по сути, не выполнено. С учетом бесспорного места России в ряду крупнейших экспортеров зерновых в мире, очевидно, что мы, соглашаясь на пакетную сделку и слыша призывы к объединению усилий в целях глобальной продбезопасности, ожидали изъятия из дискриминационного подхода к нам со стороны государств Запада, которые вели против нас беспрецедентные санкции, фактически попытавшись организовать блокаду нашим производителям. Это было важно не в наших интересах, а в интересах нуждающихся государств в мире, бедных государств. Тот факт, что санкции США, Лондона и Евросоюза формально не распространяются на продовольствие и удобрения, на деле не сыграл никакой роли. Речь идет о серьезнейших барьерах на пути нашего экспорта, снимать которые или хотя бы предоставлять работающие изъятия из которых никто и не собирался. Из-за этих барьеров Россия потеряла ряд стран-покупателей, банковские системы которых не смогли адаптироваться к новым реалиям. Зато у нас появились новые рынки, где проблемы расчетов и логистики удалось решить. И сделано это было нашими поставщиками, к сожалению, без содействия со стороны ООН. Призванный же помогать нам меморандум России и ООН фактически так и не заработал. Одно из наших ключевых требований – переподключение к системе SWIFT Россельхозбанка, официально отвергнутой ЕС и США. Разовые транзакции с разрешения Вашингтона или Брюсселя не способны обеспечить бесперебойное проведение трансграничных расчетов, равно как и способствовать долгосрочному планированию сельхозпоставок. А идеи об учреждении дочек банка нереализуемы. Никто из тех, кто сегодня кричит о том, что Россия якобы морит весь мир голодом, палец о палец не ударил даже для обеспечения безвозмездных, я подчеркиваю, безвозмездных поставок российских минеральных удобрений под эгидой ООН. С момента объявления данной сугубо гуманитарной инициативы в сентябре 2022 года из 262 тысяч тонн продукции, заблокированной в Латвии, Эстонии, Бельгии и Нидерландах, были с огромным трудом отправлены всего две партии. 20 тысяч тонн в Малави и 34 тысячи в Кении. А о том, какую роль играет удобрение в обеспечении продовольственной безопасности, мы только что услышали от Михаила Хазина. Ввоз в Россию запчастей и оборудования для производства сельхозпродукции и удобрений запрещен как товаров двойного назначения. Вся территория нашей страны объявлена зоной военных рисков с неподъемными ставками страхования до уровня запретительных, а иностранные порты закрыты для доступа наших судов и грузов. Зарубежные счета отечественных сельхозкомпаний заморожены. Частично разблокированные средства переместились в карманы тех же западников за счет погашения кредитов и оплаты безвозмездных поставок наших удобрений. Мы, тем не менее, терпеливо ждали, что наши договоренности с ООН будут выполнены. Дважды соглашались на продление сделки, несмотря на все безобразие, происходившее с Черноморской инициативой. Мы ждали результатов целый год, и этот год стал для наших производителей и экспортеров продовольствия и удобрений откровенно убыточным. Из-за падения стоимости нашего зерна на мировых рынках на 30-40% потери российских аграриев составили 1,2 миллиарда долларов. Из-за ситуации с морским фрахтом и стоимостью международных расчетов рентабельность поставок упала в 2 раза. Цены же на импортное сельхозоборудование и запчасти для наших сельхозпроизводителей выросли на 40%. Издержки при финансовых транзакциях на 10%. Не меньшие проблемы и у наших производителей удобрений, чьи потери насчитывают порядка 1,6 миллиардов долларов. Уважаемые коллеги, нас долго кормили обещаниями по поводу возобновления работы аммиакопровода Тольятти-Одесса. Почти год в попытках выторговать себе дополнительные выгоды по Черноморской инициативе Киев просто блокировал его работу, несмотря на то, что поставки аммиака прописаны обоими Стамбульскими соглашениями и должны были начаться одновременно с вывозом украинского продовольствия. Хотел бы пояснить, что экспорт аммиака нес в том числе и Киеву большие экономические выгоды. О гуманитарных же плюсах для всего мира и говорить не приходится. Судите сами, ежегодно этот трубопровод обеспечивал поставки порядка 2 миллионов тонн сырья для производства удобрений, достаточных для того, чтобы накормить 45 миллионов человек. Однако 5 июня киевский режим попросту подорвал его. Теперь же мы столкнулись с ситуацией, что мировой экспорт аммиака просел на 70%. Почему никто, в том числе в ООН, не осуждает это преступление и не бьет тревогу об упущенных возможностях и долгоиграющих последствиях безответственных действий киевского режима? Вдобавок ко всему этому мы еще и столкнулись с ситуацией, когда режим Зеленского и его западные спонсоры не гнушались, вопреки договоренностям, использовать гуманитарные коридоры для совершения атак на военные и гражданские российские объекты. Эти действия также оставались без надлежащей оценки со стороны ООН и западных стран. И вы хотите, чтобы мы с этим мирились? Уважаемые коллеги, думаю, что с учетом приведенных мною фактов никого не должно было удивить принятое нами решение о прекращении Черноморской инициативы после 17 июля и сворачивании морского гуманитарного коридора с 0 часов 0 минут московского времени 20 июля 2023 года. Теперь все суда, следующие к акватории Черного моря в украинские порты, рассматриваются нами как потенциальные перевозчики грузов военного назначения. Соответственно, страны флага таких судов будут считаться вовлеченными в украинский конфликт на стороне киевского режима. Кроме того, ряд морских районов в северо-западной и юго-восточной частях международных вод Черного моря объявлены временно опасными для судоходства. Соответствующие информационные предупреждения об отзыве гарантии безопасности мореплавателям были изданы в установленном порядке. Кроме того, мы вынуждены констатировать, что за год действия сделки киевский режим накопил под ее прикрытием значительные военно-промышленные, топливные, складские мощности в районах своих черноморских портов. Там же размещались существенные людские ресурсы ВСУ и иностранных наемников. С прекращением сделки у нас появилась возможность исправить эту ситуацию. Рассматриваем всю черноморскую портовую инфраструктуру Украины в качестве места дислокации и пополнения мощностей ВСУ западным вооружением, которое Киев использует против России. Вооруженные силы Российской Федерации высокоточным оружием морского и воздушного базирования с 19 июля наносят групповые удары по объектам военной промышленности, топливной инфраструктуры и складам боеприпасов Вооруженных сил Украины в районе города Одесса, по цехам производства и местам хранения безэкипажных катеров в районах Одессы и Ильичевска Одесской области и объектам топливной инфраструктуры и складам боеприпасов Вооруженных сил Украины в районе города Николаева. Все эти объекты успешно поражаются. На этом фоне ознакомились со вчерашней реакцией Генсекретаря ООН на наши военные действия. Хотим в этой связи задать только один вопрос. А где можно ознакомиться с аналогичным осуждением Антонио Гутерреша подрыва Киевом аммиакопровода Тольятти-Одесса, о чьем потенциале для глобальной продбезопасности мы сегодня уже упоминали? Госпожа председатель, при этом мы отдаем должное усилиям Генсекретаря ООН и его команды, которые искренне стремились к выполнению всех данных Западом обещаний, но так и не смогли ничего добиться. А вот для срыва договоренности, наши так называемые бывшие западные партнеры на Западе сил не пожалели. Сделали все, чтобы пустить сделку под откос. Кроме того, мы с вами прекрасно помним, как США, Великобритания и Франция в июле и ноябре прошлого года заблокировали попытки принять какой-либо продукт Совета Безопасности с упоминанием меморандума Россия-ООН. Теперь мы все знаем почему. Меморандум России-ООН они никогда и не собирались выполнять, как и Минские соглашения. Беспрекословной реализации стамбульских договоренностей требовали только от нас, и нам же во вред. А сегодня они лукаво пытаются обвинить Россию в срыве этой сделки. Да и вообще чуть ли не во всех бедствиях населения африканских и ряда других стран. То есть тех самых государств, из которых сам Запад в свое время выжимал все соки и ресурсы, столкнул их в пучину войн, голода и нищеты, и продолжает сейчас в рамках своей неоколониальной системы беззастенчиво грабить. А сегодня некоторые европейские страны, которые на словах говорят о том, что нужно дать возможность Украине экспортировать сельхозпродукцию, сами запрещают ввоз украинского зерна на свою территорию, ставя при этом во главу угла интересы своих товаропроизводителей. И продолжая таким образом пробивать дно цинизма и лицемерия. Уважаемые коллеги, хочу подчеркнуть, мы не против самой зерновой сделки как таковой, тем более учитывая ее значение для глобального рынка продовольствия для многих государств мира, и готовы рассмотреть возможность вернуться в нее, но только при одном условии. Если будут в полном объеме учтены, а главное реализованы все без исключения ранее согласованные принципы участия России в этой сделке. Для вашего удобства напомню, о чем идет речь. Первое – это реальный, а не умозрительный вывод из-под санкций поставок российского зерна и удобрений на мировые рынки. Второе – должны быть сняты все препятствия для российских банков, финансовых институтов, которые обслуживают поставки продовольствия и удобрений. Речь в том числе идет об их незамедлительном подключении к международной банковской системе расчетов SWIFT. Какие-то новые обещания и идеи на этот счет нас не устроят. Нам нужно только выполнение этих условий. Третье. Должны быть возобновлены поставки в Россию запчастей, комплектующих для сельхозтехники и отрасли производства удобрений. Стоимость импортных запчастей для оборудования и оборудования для наших производителей в целом выросла на 40%. Рост издержек при финансовых транзакциях порядка 10%. Общие потери составили порядка 1,6 миллиарда долларов. Четвертое. Должны быть решены все вопросы с фрахтом судов и страхованием российских экспортных поставок продовольствия. Обеспечена вся логистика продовольственных поставок. Рост стоимости фрахта морских судов для перевозки грузов и стоимости международных финансовых расчетов и других транзакций привели к потере рентабельности поставок в 2 раза. Пятое. Должны быть обеспечены беспрепятственные условия для расширения поставок российских удобрений, сырья для их производства. В том числе должна быть восстановлена работа аммиакопровода Тольятти-Одесса. Шестое. Должны быть разблокированы российские активы, связанные с сельхозотраслью. Наконец, седьмое – это восстановление изначального гуманитарного характера зерновой сделки. Она должна работать в интересах нуждающихся стран, а не делать богатые страны еще богаче. Уважаемые коллеги, как только все эти условия будут выполнены, мы незамедлительно вернемся в зерновую сделку. Именно их выполнение станет вкладом западных государств в обеспечение международной продовольственной безопасности. Пока же все, что мы видим и слышим, это лишь демагогия и лицемерие. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, dear colleagues, I thank Ecuador and France for the initiative to convene this meeting. I also thank USG Griffith and USG Di Carlo for their updates on the situation on the ground, and Mr. Kazim for his briefing. Brazil has seen with great concern the attacks of recent days against facilities on the Black Sea coast. Destruction of civilian infrastructure is against international humanitarian law and should not be used as a tool by any conflicting part. While deeply regretting the discontinuation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, We encourage the parties involved in this particular negotiation process to keep seeking mutually beneficial solutions that can prevent further aggravation of food insecurity in the world. The conflict in Ukraine has caused considerable human suffering, not only in the fighting zone, but also in distant regions. Since its beginning, we have warned of its impact on developing countries, which are more vulnerable to rising food, fertilizer, and energy prices. Madam President, throughout the dozens of meetings already held by this Council since the opening of hostilities, we have heard repeated demands for developing countries to take a position on one side of the war. However, those who make these demands do not seem to listen carefully to the positions that have been presented here and elsewhere on the complex causes and worldwide consequences of the conflict. Earlier this week, at the General Assembly debate on the situation of Ukraine, the representative of a member state rightly observed that the voices of the Global South must be heard. Amidst the diversity of views among member states of our organization, there is a message consistently being repeated. It is high time to put an end to war and limit as much as possible its collateral effects. We encourage all parties to resume negotiations on the Black Sea Initiative and urge those parties to refrain from actions that could disrupt the unimpeded flow of food and fertilizers. Brazil expresses its sincere appreciation and support for the mediation efforts of the Secretary General and the government of Turkey, and hopes that the parties will show the necessary flexibility to revive the spirit of the Istanbul agreements. We reiterate our call for the de-escalation of hostilities and the opening of peace negotiations based on respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and recognition of the legitimate security concerns of all. Achieving this goal is our common responsibility under the United Nations Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Kingdom. I'd like to start by thanking Under Secretary General Di Carlo and Under Secretary General Griffiths for their briefings. My Foreign Secretary said on Monday in this chamber that Russia's termination of the BSGI was taking food out of the mouths of the poorest people across the world. 64% of the 33 million tonnes of grain exported under the deal went to low and middle income countries. Unsurprisingly then, Kenya called Russia's withdrawal a stab in the back of countries in the Horn of Africa already impacted by drought. Russian missile attacks on Odessa, Chornomorsk and Mykolaiv destroyed over 60,000 tonnes of grain. That's enough to feed 270,000 people for a year, or to double WFP shipments under the BSGI to Sudan and Somalia. Russia has destroyed dock equipment, making it harder to load grain on ships. And now Russia has gone further, burning food at the dockside and making threats to murder civilian sailors. There is no possible justification for these punitive acts. Moreover, Russia has benefited from the deal. Russian food exports are significantly above pre-war levels. Russian food and fertilizer exports have never been sanctioned. The UK has worked with its banking and insurance sectors to facilitate transactions, and the UN has worked tirelessly to address Russian concerns. We know that Russia's so-called reasons for ending the deal are nonsense. Ukraine has made no demands. As Foreign Minister Kuleba said in this room, Ukraine wants nothing more than to make its food available to the world. Up to 24 million tons of Ukrainian food may now not reach world markets because of Russia. Russia's actions have already raised prices with immediate impact on the world's poorest and hungriest people. And Russia's latest demands are tantamount to holding the world starving hostage. We thank Turkey, the UN and Ukraine for their efforts to protect the deal. We call on Russia to rejoin it and to end the war. Food is not a weapon. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I thank the Undersecretary General DiCarlo and Undersecretary General Griffiths for their insightful and comprehensive briefings. I would also like to express my particular gratitude to the delegation of Ecuador for personal participation in this meeting of His Excellency Foreign Minister Gustavo Manrique and for his principled statement. I also recognize the representative of the person on the ICC wanted list in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. The first days following the undermining of the Black Sea Grain Initiative have unequivocally testified to the Russian rationale behind this insidious step. Not bothering to fabricate any plausible explanation, Russia has proceeded to the deliberate destruction of Ukrainian capabilities for grain export. Since Monday, the barrage of Russian missile and drone strikes has mainly targeted Ukrainian ports, infrastructure, and storage facilities. On 18th till 20th July alone, Russia attacked Ukraine with 56 cruise missiles and 87 Iranian-origin drones. The list of missiles included Kalibr, Onyx, Ha-22, Iskander, and Ha-59 missiles. In the port of Chernomorsk alone, Russian strikes destroyed 60,000 tons of grain. For a long time, this cargo was intended to be loaded onto large tonnage vessel. This vessel, however, spent over 60 days in the queue of the grain corridor due to inspections being sabotaged by Russia. The missile attacks also destroyed grain terminals, reservoirs, and berths of the ports of Odessa and Chernomorsk. Last night, Russia continued its missile terror, targeting grain warehouses. As a result of the strike by Kalibr missiles, 100 tons of peas and 20 tons of barley were destroyed, as reported by Odessa regional authorities. Putin's envoy has tried to invent some arguments about why Russia is so persistent in undermining global food security by destroying Ukrainian grain and other foodstuff. The sly purpose, however, was revealed by Russia itself at the beginning of June at the so-called St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The head of the infamous Russia Today state propaganda factory, Margarita Simonyan, in the presence of Putin, openly stated, I quote, "All our hope is for the famine." Here is what it means. It means that the famine will start now, and they will lift the sanctions and be friends with us, because they will realize it is necessary, end of quote. In fact, since Russia has already brought to this chamber many oddballs, let me play back the original in Russian. Right. And sorry for the technical difficulties. I will give it to you. I will send the original video to you later on. But anyway, as for the intervention of certain self-proclaimed microeconomist, Mr. Hazin, I'd like to refer him to the famous lecture of Professor Harry Frankfurt on humbug. And I quote, He does not reject the authority of the truth, as the liar does. He pays no attention to it at all. By virtue of this, Mr. Hazin's statement is a greater enemy of the truth than lies are. The current actions of Russia only serve to confirm that she was indeed heard. According to expert assessments, further attacks on Ukrainian ports, increased risk to industrial complexes, and the inability to export grains by sea routes will lead to further increase in prices for corn and wheat in the short run. There is also a risk of the suspension of operations at several Ukrainian oilseed processing plants and a reduction in the processing pace of sunflower seeds and rapeseeds, which will significantly impact global prices for sunflower oil. The terror nature of this shelling is aggravated by the fact that such missiles as Onyx and Ha-22 are designed as anti-ship missiles to be launched from the Bastion P ground-based coastal defense system. They have low precision against ground targets. At the same time, it is difficult for Ukrainian air defense to detect and shoot down such missiles as they approach targets at high speed and low altitude. The low accuracy of anti-ship missiles leads to tragedies like that one that occurred on 20th July in Mykolaiv, where a Russian missile hit a residential building, killing a married couple in their apartment and wounding another 19 civilians, including 5 children. Fatalities among civilians were also recorded in Odessa, which sustained heavy missile shelling in recent days. Distinguished colleagues, on July 19, 2023, the Ministry of War of Russia declared that the Russian Federation would attack all merchant vessels in Black Sea waters headed to Ukrainian ports. In fact, the representative of Putin's regime has already repeated the same statement here in today's meetings. Russia's threats to use force against civilian vessels, regardless of their flag, merits strong condemnation. They are an attack on freedom of navigation throughout the world. Russia's intentions to consider foreign vessels as military targets grossly violates its obligations under international law and to all states that conduct peaceful navigation in the Black Sea. According to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, merchant vessels of states not involved in an armed conflict have the right to free and peaceful navigation, which is not considered an act of aggression. Norms of international humanitarian law prohibit any attacks against vessels of neutral states if they do not engage in belligerent acts or do not support military efforts. There is no basis to believe that merchant vessels of foreign nations are supporting military efforts simply by exporting grain to other countries that need it in order to avert the threat of hunger. Russia's action cannot be justified by any norms of international law, including the belligerent's right to blockade. Russia's declaration has no legitimate direct military objective. Instead, it is intended to intimidate neutral states. Russia's declaration covers the entire Black Sea, not just an area immediately around Ukrainian ports, and moreover, does not make exceptions for medical and other humanitarian considerations, as is required by the laws of naval warfare. Madam President, lacking any credible argument to justify what could not be justified, its attacks on the right of people throughout the globe to food, Russia continues to cynically claim that this initiative was a commercial endeavor, not a humanitarian one. I'm not going to focus on the moral aspects of such claims from a state that increases its revenues by stealing Ukrainian grain from the occupied territories, which then ends up on the global markets. At the same time, I will remind the Council of the figures mentioned by the Secretary General in his statement of 17th of July. The initiative that ensured the safe passage of over 32 million tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports and helped to reduce food prices by over 23% since March last year. The World Food Programme has shipped more than 725,000 tons to support humanitarian operations, relieving hunger in Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and Yemen. Russia's withdrawal from the grain initiative and its constant cynical attacks on Ukrainian port infrastructure, navigation means, and grain terminals are nothing else but Russia's attempts to eliminate a market competitor, deliberately raise world food prices, and make profit at the expense of millions of people around the world. We call on our partners to fully support Ukraine's initiative to establish a humanitarian maritime corridor in the Black Sea. The humanitarian corridor will restore vital food supply routes to the regions that need them the most. We call on the international community to condemn Russia's actions and take appropriate measures to ensure the safety of navigation in the Black Sea as a guarantee of food security around the world. In the words of my president, Russian terrorists want to become exemplary in the way they destroy life. We will become exemplary in the way we protect life and in the way life then responds, justly and inevitably, to every blow inflicted on every terrorist. Before I end, I would like to use this opportunity to make a formal request to the representatives of the Secretary General present in this chamber. I ask them to draw the attention of the relevant UN officials, in particular the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict, to the public confession of the officials of the Belarusian National Red Cross Committee, where they admit to their involvement in the illegal, mass, forceful removal of children from the occupied territories of Ukraine. I also ask them to properly monitor and report on this shocking situation, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank you for organizing this meeting, and we also thank Undersecretary General Griffiths and Undersecretary General DiCarlo for their briefings. In addition to the loss of thousands of civilian lives, millions of displaced people, and the billions of dollars of material damage, the ongoing war in Ukraine also continues to have negative repercussions on energy prices, supply chain disruptions, and global food insecurity. The Black Sea Grain Initiative has had a stabilizing effect on the prices of grain and contributed to global food security for almost 1 year. This initiative has allowed more than 32.8 million tons of various grain products to reach the world markets since August 2022. It helped avert a major food shortage and ease the lowest income countries' access to food products. The World Food Programme also benefited from the reduced prices in its operations. Therefore, the resumption of the Black Sea Initiative remains crucial as part of common endeavors to fight global hunger and ensure stable food prices for consumers everywhere. The permanent termination of the Black Sea Initiative will be harmful to the global food market. The countries that depend on the price stability provided by the initiative will suffer the most. Both the Black Sea Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding between the UN and the Russian Federation are crucial for the vulnerable people around the world. This is why we need to combine our efforts and find a way to implement the two components of the deal simultaneously. To this end, we commend the efforts of the Secretary General for the facilitation of the export of Russian food and fertilizer products. We recognize that there is still room for improvement. This also requires further steps from all relevant stakeholders. We must be mindful that the world's most vulnerable communities depend on a compromise we would devise to revive the initiative. We hope that the current suspension will be temporary and the operations will be resumed as soon as possible by addressing the needs and expectations of all stakeholders. We will continue our efforts in coordination with the UN and the two sides. In the meantime, we urge all sides to remain calm, exercise restraint, and avoid taking any unilateral steps that might jeopardize prospects for the resumption of the initiative. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Turkey for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Romania.
Thank you, Madam President. And I would like to thank France and Ecuador for calling this meeting, USG DiCarlo and USG Griffiths for their briefings, as well as the UK presidency for allowing my delegation to take the floor. Yesterday, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about trust, solidarity, and universality when launching his policy brief on the new agenda for peace. In his policy brief, he also mentions that the war is a choice. A year and a half since its invasion of Ukraine, Russia still wages a war of choice. In a similar and defiant way to the needs of developing countries, Russia's decision to denounce BSGI is a matter of choice. But Russia's decision has multidimensional effects around the world. We are yet to anticipate them all. But we will stand in solidarity with those in need. Romania joins previous speakers in commending the efforts of the UN and others, in particular Turkey, to be constructive and alleviate the tensions on the food market. We also call on Russia to reconsider its decision and make the right choice in returning to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. BSGI remains a good example of multilateralism at work, but all players need to be constructive and abide by the rules, the UN Charter, international law, international humanitarian law. Out of the 41 million grains from Ukraine that were exported through the EU solidarity lanes, over 20 million transited Romania. Together with the 32 million tons of grains via BSGI, the total amount that left from the Black Sea shores to the world is over 50 million grains. This means choice to uphold trust, solidarity, and universality. My country will continue to uphold its promise to the world and to make its own contribution in mitigating the risks of food global crisis, both in national capacity as a direct neighbor to Ukraine and as member of the European Union. Together with the UN, the European Union did everything in its power to deal with the challenges posed by an actor that undermined international law. A pragmatical choice was favored, one that made all efforts so that developing countries could benefit from BSGI and the grains exported through it. BSGI is a win for all those participating in it and for all those benefiting from it. BSGI is a clear expression of leave no one behind. Its restoration is imperative. Madam President, we continue to be appalled by the high number of attacks targeting schools and hospitals in Ukraine. Again and again, attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are strictly prohibited under international law and must cease immediately. This includes the ongoing strikes with missiles and drones on the Ukraine's ports of Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Mykolaiv. Upholding international law and UN Charter principles is paramount. Otherwise, we become accessory to impunity. It is not how we want to project the future of incoming generations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Romania for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Olof Skog, the Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And thank you to the Undersecretary General De Carlo and Griffiths for their briefings and for your relentless efforts under the leadership of the Secretary General over the last year or so. Madam President, a permanent member of the Security Council is threatening to attack any ship, regardless of its cargo or its flag, that enters part of the Black Sea. So now we're all potential targets of the Russian aggression. It is bombing grain warehouses and infrastructure in Ukrainian ports, key to food security globally. And it has torpedoed the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And yet it claims to care about global food security. Madam President, the EU condemns Russia's choice to terminate the Black Sea Grain Initiative. It further aggravates the global food crisis, and it causes price increases for foodstuff globally. Hundreds of millions of already vulnerable people, in particular in Africa, will pay the price. We commend the efforts of the United Nations and Turkey to continue engaging in a constructive dialogue, and we call on Russia to reconsider its withdrawal. Any arrangements have to include Ukraine. Since withdrawing, Russia has bombed port infrastructures, as we've heard, in Odessa, Chornomorsk and Mykolaiv, causing civilian casualties, including children. According to reports, more than 60,000 tons of grain destined for exports were destroyed on Wednesday. Russia has threatened to attack grain shipments passing through the Black Sea. This is completely unacceptable. The inconvenient truth that Russia wishes to hide is that it is benefiting from higher global food prices. Publicly available data demonstrate that Russian grain exports have reached record volumes. From 1st of July 2022 to 30th of June 2023, Russia's wheat exports reached 44.7 million tons, more than 10% higher than the average for previous years. Its fertilizer exports are nearing full recovery. In contrary to claims by Russian disinformation, the Black Sea Grain Initiative benefited all food importing countries by contributing to lower global prices. The export of almost 33 million tons of grains and foodstuffs from Ukraine to 45 different countries reduced prices by over 23% since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Half of the grain, including 2/3 of the wheat, went to developing countries. Half of the total World Food Programme grain procurement in support of its humanitarian operations in the most food-insecure countries comes from Ukraine. Without the Black Sea route, the WFP will have to source its assistance elsewhere at a higher cost. The Black Sea Grain Initiative is a major deliverable of effective multilateralism and, in the words of the Secretary General, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needs it. Since Russia's withdrawal, prices on wheat and corn, as we've heard this morning, have surged. The simple truth is that Russia has made a cynical calculation. By blocking exports from Ukraine, it will make higher profits from its own exports. The Secretary General clearly demonstrated that Russia gained important benefits from the Memorandum of Understanding of Food and Fertilizer Exports. The UN has worked relentlessly to unblock assets, facilitate regulatory frameworks, and engage with the private sector to find dedicated solutions across banking and insurance sectors. These efforts were conducted in close collaboration with the EU. While Russia spreads disinformation and maintains its own export restrictions on food and fertilizer to drive up prices, the EU has spared no effort to avoid that our sanctions impact the food security of third countries. We provided extensive guidance to economic operators on the implementation of sanctions, clarifying that transfer of Russian food and fertilizers to third countries by EU operators and our territory is permitted. We introduced a legislative derogation in December authorizing transactions with sanctioned individuals to facilitate such trade. We worked with the UN to build a bespoke payments mechanism for the Russian Agriculture Bank through JP Morgan outside of SWIFT to allow food and fertilizer-related payments. And we are working closely with the UN and partners to address any specific bottlenecks and facilitate the access of food and fertilizers originating from Russia. Russia knows all this. The EU and its member states remain committed to address the needs of countries vulnerable to food insecurity. The Food Systems Summit in Rome next week will call for accelerated action in this regard.
In addition to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, the EU solidarity lanes have allowed the export of more than 41 million tons of Ukraine's food and agricultural goods. We're also providing 18 billion euros to address food security needs, focusing on the most vulnerable regions, and we reiterate our call on all countries to step up their own humanitarian assistance in this regard. Madam President, we call on Russia to stop using food as a weapon and rejoin the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The EU will continue to act to fight food insecurity. Food cannot be used as a political tool. We remain open to explore solutions with the United Nations that would contribute to the resumption of the grain deal. In closing, I remind the Council that the Black Sea Grain Initiative would not have been necessary if Russia had not waged a war of aggression against its neighbor and blocked Ukrainian ports for exporting grain. And I reiterate the EU's unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its international recognized borders and its inherent right of self-defense. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Skoog for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.